Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to Youth Perspectives. I'm Rabab, and today I have with me Azra, like usual. And today's topic is actually a really interesting topic because it applies to a lot of youth. And today's topic is music. And we're going to be talking about, in general, the bad effects of music. We'll relate to you some stories just to kind of allow you to better understand that, and just have an overall discussion of why music is haram. Because usually we're told that you can't listen to music, but when you go to school or wherever you go, you see that all your friends and at the grocery store, music is just something that's like so common. It's like TV, it's like something everyone does. So it's people tend to, they know it's bad, and they avoid it, and that's good, but they don't understand why. And I always feel like whatever you do, like in Islam, it's always nice to know. Like I heard this, and I don't know where I heard this, but I heard this in a majlis, that it's important to know it's important for you to know why you're doing something in Islam, because you're not just blindly doing it, because that will increase our spirituality, and it'll help us to avoid the thing even more. And what a great example of this would be music itself. So just to start off about our discussion about music, Azra, do you want to tell us, why do you think music is such an issue these days?
Okay, definitely. First of all, assalamu alaikum. The reason why music today, of all times, is a really, really relevant issue and a serious issue that needs to be addressed is because, unfortunately, our society has become so desensitized to it. Because music is everywhere, like Rabab mentioned. You watch a movie or a show, it's playing in the background. You go to Walmart or a grocery store or to the mall, anywhere it's playing. Or if you sit in the car with your friends, they're listening to it. Even your Muslim friends or even your non-Muslim friends, everyone listens to music, and it's so hard to kind of stay away from it because it's everywhere. And the sad thing is, once we become habitualized to something bad, once we normalize a sin, it becomes so hard to eradicate that from our lives. So we have to be very careful, because once music becomes something that we're okay with, it becomes really hard to truly understand why it's a bad thing, because everyone does it, it might not be that bad, right? But unfortunately, music is a serious issue, and that's why we chose to cover that issue today in this segment. So that's one thing, that we become desensitized to it. And once we become desensitized to something, it opens the path to a variety of other sins. Because Shaitan is not dumb. He's smart. He knows how to get to us. So he does that thing where one little thing seems okay. Maybe first you hear music playing somewhere, and then you don't feel that bad because you hear it everywhere. And then you go to the store and you actually actively start listening to the music because it's catchy. And then you start being okay if your friends play it in the car, you don't say anything against it. And then to the point where you might accidentally click a video, or you're watching a movie and it comes and you're just like, the music is playing, whatever. And then to the point where you are actively yourself going out and seeking to listen to music, and then it just becomes part of your everyday life, and it becomes so hard. So desensitization, being okay with something, is the first step, and then Shaitan just keeps getting you from there until you've reached so far to the point of no return. And once you reach to that point, it becomes so hard to come back. So we constantly have to watch ourselves, So that's another thing. And thirdly, you can negatively influence other people, because whether you like it or not, you have this circle of influence. You influence the people closest to you. You influence the people who interact with you, your friends, your family members, other people in the Shia community, in the Muslim community. And you are an ambassador of Islam. So if you're someone who listens to music, you're obviously going to influence and maybe even encourage other people to do the same. And at the end of the day, you really don't want that on your plate, that you caused someone to do a sin because you made it seem like it was okay. So that's another reason that it's not about you sometimes, because as a Muslim, you have the circle of influence, and we have to be very careful about what we do, because we might be responsible for what other people commit, the sins they commit to, and that's something we don't want.
Yeah, Azra, you made some really good and very valid and very true and interesting points here. That, when we expose ourselves to music, like Azra mentioned, that, we slowly, if you expose yourself more and more to music, you slowly get more desensitized to it. And that's a major problem, because when you think one small thing is okay, then, you think something a little bigger than that's okay, and then you get into that, you end up coming into a habit of listening to music, and that's really bad, and we don't even realize it's bad because we're slowly over time becoming more used to it. And living in America here, I admit it can be difficult to ignore the music around us and try kind of try to control ourselves in these matters, but we have to learn to control it, so we have to not let ourselves get into that loop. And right now, if you already don't listen to music, that's a really great thing, because like I mentioned before, living in America, music is literally everywhere. So sometimes people can get a little attracted to it, and like Azra mentioned before, you kind of get into a habit of listening to music. So we have to take a first step and try to not listen to music at all. And that means, when you go to the grocery store, when you go in someone's car, or wherever you are and there's music playing, just try to ignore it. And the way I'm saying it may seem hard to ignore the music. However, if you actually try it, if you actually distract yourself on your phone, or say if you have headphones, you can play a qasida or something in your phone, and you can easily ignore the music. So in that way, we have to not expose ourselves to even the smallest amount of music, even if we're not putting it on ourselves and have that guilt with that. Even if we're somewhere else, we have to try to avoid the music. In addition to that, I would like to kind of talk about the origin of music. Oh, and one more point that Azra mentioned that was really a great point, that listening to music, we influence other people around us. So if, God forbid, you start listening to music, your brother, your sister, or your friend, or someone, maybe your friend in the community who doesn't listen to music, gets influenced by you, because we know that people do get influenced by the environment around us. That's just like a fact about humans, that we tend to get influenced by our environment, by our family, and by our friends. So that's why they say to choose the right friends and to keep yourselves in a good environment. So if you make that sin of listening to music, and if you somehow influence someone else to do the same, you're gonna get the guna of them listening to music. That's actually a fact, that you don't, first of all, you get guna yourself for doing something bad, and then you get guna for making someone else do something bad. So we really have to keep in mind all of that, because right now we don't even know where we are in terms of our gunas. So we really have to watch out for that and make sure that we're not doing something bad and we're not influencing anyone else to do anything bad. So now, moving on from that discussion, I wanted to talk about the origin of music. So a lot of us, I didn't know this myself until, I did some research and read about it, but the origin of music is actually from shaitan. And what happened was, our very first prophet Adam alayhi salam, he actually, after he passed away, we all know that he had two sons, right? Habil and Qabil. So we know the son who was not very good was Qabil, right? He was actually, he was the bad son. And so what happened was, after the death of his father, Prophet Adam, Qabil and Shaitan decided to celebrate. And how they decided to celebrate? They created musical instruments. And so they played music in order to celebrate the death of their father. Now, if we look at this situation, it looks like such a bad situation, right? Music was created in order to celebrate the death of our first prophet. So if you think to yourself, whenever you hear music, you should think about why should I listen to something that was started as something that was against our prophet? So if we really take these things into perspective, and we really truly understand how bad music really is, then we can kind of distance ourselves away from it. So that's why I kind of wanted to talk about the origin of music. So in addition to the origin of music, I wanted to talk about its physical effects. So this is something that really, when I read about it, it really, I could really relate to it, because whenever you hear music, these effects really started to, I kind of started relating to that. So, and when I talk to my friends and everything, they listen. I have friends that they're not Muslim, of course, and they listen to music, and I can kind of see these effects in them too. So that's how I could really relate to that. So I wanted to talk about the physical effects that music has on us. So I want to kind of give an overview of our nervous system. So we all know what the nervous system is, right, in our bodies, and the nervous system comprises of, one part of the nervous system is actually called the autonomic nervous system, and this has to deal with all our involuntary actions, so things that we can't control. And the autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Now, sympathetic deals with accelerating things in our body, it increases our heartbeat, it increases our blood pressure. And parasympathetic kind of does the opposite of that. And these two systems, which remember are a part of the autonomic, which is the involuntary nervous system, they run opposite to each other. And while they run opposite to each other, because they're opposites, like I said, the sympathetic, it kind of speeds things up, while the parasympathetic slows things down. While they remain opposite to each other, they maintain like an equilibrium. So they keep everything in balance. That's basically what that means. So what music does is, the real effect that music has is that it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. So it can make our blood, it can increase our blood pressure, it increases our heartbeat, and it has similar types of effects. So it has the kind of effects you would see that we feel in kind of an emergency. So whenever, if someone is in like an emergency kind of situation, you know how their body systems kind of react to that and speed up. So this is kind of what music does. It stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. And when it stimulates one of them, this kind of creates an imbalance in the systems because they run opposite to each other. So in that way, music is unhealthy for us. And while it's disrupting this whole equilibrium, the physical effects that you can see on the outside of the body is that, after someone listens to music, they tend to be tired. So I don't know if we've all heard music in our lives, right, at some point or another. And if you've ever felt it, like I can see it in my friends, after they listen to music, it seems like they're tired. And it actually does make you tired for some reason, even though if someone's just sitting somewhere and they're just constantly, they've been doing nothing except listening to music, then, they feel this tiredness in them, even though they've done no physical activity or anything. So that's kind of something we should really pay attention to, that it causes these physical effects. And this was actually found in a study by a scientist at Columbia University. He actually found that it causes fatigue. So that's something that, I could see this example in my friends. So that's like a physical effect that music has. In addition to that, it causes insomnia, which means it causes a lack of sleep. So if someone listens to a lot of music, it causes them to sleep less. And I can also see this in people around me. They complain about the less hours of sleep. Even if they don't have that much homework or anything else, they have a tough time sleeping. And these people do listen to a lot of music, so we can see a potential link over there. So, according to research studies and everything, these are the things that they found, that it causes insomnia, which is a lack of sleep, and it just causes some natural fatigue. So moving on, it also causes temper, like an increase in your temper. So if someone suddenly gets angry, those kind of things are also caused by music. So these are just some of the effects that music can have on the human body, and we really need to see, because this is actually physically affecting us, so it's bad for our health. And many people, because it's so common, and like Azra was saying, it's in movies, it's like everywhere you go. If you go to the grocery store, no matter where you go, you hear music because it's just so normal. But people, essentially, they don't redo their research or anything, and they don't essentially see what are the negative physical effects of music. So here at this program, our goal is to allow you guys to understand this, so then when next time you hear music somewhere, if you know that it can harm your health, you can kind of stay away from it. So those are the physical effects of listening to music. So now I'm going to kind of come to Azra now. Azra, do you want to tell us about the bad content in music, or in general about the content of music?
Yes, definitely. So Rabab talked about the physical effects. So I'm going to talk a little about the mental effects, because when we're exposed to music every single day, we slowly, that becomes part of our subconscious. Because we keep hearing these certain lyrics, these certain wordings of the music, and then it just becomes stuck at the back of our mind, and we become okay with what's being said. And if you really look into the wordings of music, the music talks about very, very, sinful things. The music talks about drugs, there are many bad words in music, to the point where usually with songs they have like the original version with all the bad words, and then they have a clean version, because some versions of songs are so bad and have so many bad words that we have to have like a clean version for people who don't want to be exposed to that. So that's just terrible. So these songs talk about drugs. They have bad words, and then they talk about unlawful things in our religion, like sinful relationships. And a lot of music is about that, right? About this dysfunctional, twisted version of love. And it's really disappointing because love is a very, very pure emotion. It's something you feel towards your family, your friends, your spouse, people who you care about. And the fact that music kind of feeds you this twisted version of that, it kind of corrupts the purity of that emotion. And over time, if you keep listening to songs that constantly talk about drugs, about drinking, constantly use bad words, constantly talk about unlawful relationships, you start becoming okay with it. So that kind of ties back to the desensitization, because not only are you okay with listening to music, but now you're going to be okay with everything that music is talking about. And it's very scary, and it happens subconsciously. So we're not actively aware of it, but over time, if we keep hearing, okay, drugs, or if you constantly hear certain bad words, it just becomes part of our language, and one day we'll stub our toe and that word will come out and you can't take it back. So it's really, really scary to think that something that is not in our control can have such a profound effect on our mind and our thoughts and our actions. And on top of that, music also encourages listeners to give in to their animalistic instincts. Because like I said, music talks about, drugs and drinking and, unlawful relationships. And these are all like carnal desires that really are not, used based on intellect. It's all emotional things. It's all things that materialistic things, carnal things that we want, animalistic things that we want. And the fact that music causes us to give into these desires, and the fact that music normalizes the achievement and the attainment of these desires is a very bad thing, because in Islam, one main thing about Islam is self-control. And the fact that the music, the lyrics and wordings in music kind of encourage us to eradicate that self-control and to kind of go out and gain whatever we want in this life, to go out and achieve whatever we want in this life, even if it's haram, that itself is a really bad thing. And we have to be very careful, because again, we keep mentioning music is everywhere. It's so easy to become subconsciously desensitized, and once you are, it's hard. So those are two things. And lastly, I wanted to mention a story by this Mughal king in India. He was an Orthodox Muslim, and he banned all sorts of musical instruments, and musicians weren't allowed to play in his kingdom. So anything music was not allowed in his kingdom. So one day, all the people who were musicians and who gained their earnings in a musical profession, they started this huge parade, and they were walking with a coffin up on their heads, and they just walked across the king's palace. So the king asked, who died, what happened, why is this coffin passing in front of me? So the musicians said, they were crying, and the coffin was representing, music, and the fact that the king killed the concept of music and destroyed their livelihood. The coffin was representing what they had lost, which was, music in the kingdom. So when the king heard that, he smiled, and he said, "Very good. Dig the grave so deep as to ensure that the dead does not rise again for hundreds of years to come." And it's very important, because this king, if you're a king of India, you have all the luxuries in the world. You can literally, you have all the power, and everything you say, like, your wish is everyone's command. So he had the privilege to have all the luxuries in the world, yet he chose to abandon music. He could have asked for anything, but music is one thing he did not want, because he understood the detrimental effects. He understood how harmful music is. So that's something that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, Azra, those are some really beautiful points you made here. That, music, it influences us in ways that we don't even see. And it has these really negative effects, like I mentioned before, the physical effects, and like Azra mentioned, it has some negative messages that we kind of just get used to. Like, for example, I have a friend who listens to music, and she sometimes is singing the music, and I'm like, what are you saying? It's like such weird things that she's saying, but she's like, because she herself, she says, I don't know what I'm singing, because whatever she hears, she just it gets stuck in her head, and then she doesn't even know the really bad things that she's saying, even though, she's a good person. It's not like she does any bad things, but, when she hears the music, she gets so used to it, and it gets stuck in her mind, and then she ends up saying things that, she doesn't really believe in or doesn't mean, but just because it was in the song, it gets stuck in her head, and it kind of, in that way, it would slowly influence her. So looking at this, we sometimes don't see, because music kind of, because it brings so much pleasure to people. The purpose of music is to make people feel good, right? It kind of gets into our feelings and into our emotions, and that's why people listen to it, because they can connect to it, and they can really feel the music. So people, that's how people listen to music. And so that's kind of similar to what happened to my friend. So we really have to understand like this negative effect that music has on us. And some people, you may think that, why can't I listen to music? It makes me feel really good. However, that's the problem with music, that it attracts people so much that they start becoming blind to other things. So it really has a serious effect, because actually I want to relate a story that I actually read, that there was a lady and a man, and what happened was the man came home one day and he saw that the lady had a red mark on her face, and he was really surprised because it was like a severe burn. It was really intense. And so he asked her, what happened? And so the lady said, the TV was on, there was music playing, and well, the phone rang, and instead of picking up the phone, she picked up the iron and then put it on her face. So this is something pretty shocking. Like, she was so invested in the music that she was unaware of her surroundings. So instead of picking up the phone, she picked up the iron, and that had obviously a negative effect on her. So music really captivates us in a really negative way, in that, it distracts us from important things around us. So we really need to understand that we do need to understand that it may make us feel good, it may connect to our emotions or whatever, that people say, but when it does that, it distracts us from essential things that are going on around us. So we really need to be aware of that when we hear music, so we can kind of distract ourselves from it and not listen to it, because then we can become distracted and bad things can happen. So in addition to that, my idea that I wanted to convey was, even though music may sound really good and it may really touch you and everything, it has negative effects. It can make you blind to other things. So I kind of wanted to talk also about a little bit about Imam Musa Kazim and relate a story related to music to him, because his birthday is actually coming up. It's on the 7th of Safar, and so to kind of commemorate to him and to kind of talk about music, I wanted to relate a story to you all. So what happened one day was, Imam Musa Kazim he was walking down the street, and he passed by a house where there was really loud music going on there. Like, you could hear the music from outside. And what happened was, while that was happening, a servant, she came out of the house, and Imam Musa Kazim and she was just taking out the trash. So Imam Musa Kazim asked her, so she was actually a slave, right, or a servant. And so the Imam asked her, is your master, like the person inside, is he your slave? Is he a slave? And so she was really confused. She's like, obviously he's not a slave. I'm the slave here, he's the person I work for. She was really confused. And so what happened was, the servant lady, after she spoke to the Imam, she went inside and she told this to the person she worked for. She told this to her master. And so after she told him, that I ran into a person outside, and he's related to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was asking me whether you were a servant. And so she said how she was confused and everything. And so this man, he suddenly, something hit him, and then he became aware that, that he didn't say anything, but he kind of became aware that in reality, even though he may appear as a master, he's actually a slave, he's actually a servant. And so what happened was, he came outside and he talked to the Imam. And after talking to the Imam, he realized, he went without his shoes, and then he realized that he is actually a slave, and he is actually a servant, and he's a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if he was really a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he wouldn't ever disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by listening to the music, that's what he was doing. So after that moment, after he talked to the Imam, he realized that music is bad, and if I listen to music, even though it brings me pleasure, I'm disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And essentially, I'm not a master, I'm a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So through the story, we can kind of see that, it's very important. If we want to stay close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to avoid music. And literally one of the things that music does, one of the effects that it has, is that it actually takes us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Believe it or not, it may not seem like that, but when a person listens to music, then the music gets stuck in their mind. Instead of thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time, they end up thinking about this music, because we all know how people are always saying, oh, this song is stuck in my head, or anything like that. So it takes us away from thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and instead we're thinking about the music. And so in this way, it's taking us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we really have to understand here how music kind of captivates us and it distracts us, and how it takes us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we should really avoid it with all its physical effects and everything. So now, Azra, I'm going to come back to you. Would you like to give us a philosophical viewpoint on music?
Yes, definitely. Basically, when it comes to the human experience, we divide our mind into two parts: intellect and emotions. And these two parts are constantly at war with each other. They're constantly trying to overcome each other, right? Intellect and emotions. So what is intellect, right? Intellect is the function and the ability to think and understand clearly. And then emotions are things such that we feel, such as desire, anger, hate, repulsion, attraction, love. These are like feelings, our feelings. And our intellect, our thoughts, and our emotions are always in contradiction to each other. So the thing that music does, and like Rabab mentioned near the beginning of the segment, that music causes people to have a shorter temper, it makes them more angry, it's because that music does something to your brain where it intensifies your emotions. So whatever emotions you feel of love, anger, hate, repulsion, attraction, name it, you start feeling that more because of the music. And you obviously understand that, right? When you're just sitting, it's quiet, you're just having normal emotions. But if there's a song playing, suddenly you're like, even in the background if it's playing, you feel like your emotions are just like tenfold. And that's the impact music has on you. So the fact that music causes your emotions to become so profound that they overtake your intellect is a really big thing, because that means once your emotions take over and your intellect is riding shotgun, it's very dangerous, because you start doing things that you would not do in normal circumstances. I'll give you an example. When people listen to music, what's the number one thing they do? They dance, right? So we've all seen this before. If people had headphones in their ears, and to them they're hearing the music, and you kind of see them trying to like dance a little to the music, but to you it's silent, and they look so weird doing that. Or if you see a video and people are dancing and there's no volume, they just look like they're crazy. And then to them, they think that it's so cool, because they're just so taken up in their emotions that they don't care. They find the urge to move. They have this urge to move. And that's really sad, because you notice when people take drugs or when people drink alcohol, the same thing happens. Their emotions take the wheel and they start doing things that they wouldn't normally do. So music has that profound effect where your intellect where your emotions kind of overtake your intellect, and you start doing things, you start saying things, you start acting in ways which you really wouldn't in normal circumstances. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He did not allow us to listen to music, because as Muslims we're supposed to listen to our intellect before anything. And intellectually, doing certain things that people do when they listen to music would not make any sense at all. That's not a good representation of who you should be as a Muslim and as a human being, for that matter. So if all those scientific reasonings don't get to you, just to maintain your honor, dignity, and self-respect, really don't listen to music, because you will regret the things you did while you were listening to music when you're not listening to it, because you will just regret it, and it won't make any sense when you're not listening to music anymore.
Yeah, Azra, that's a really important point that you made, that that when we listen to music, it takes over our emotions. That's a really interesting and beautiful point, that when it takes over our emotions, we don't use our intellect. And like Azra said, if when someone's listening to music in their headphones, it looks like to you that it's silent, everything. Like if you're in a library, like I see this when you're at college, and then you see people with headphones, and if they start dancing or anything, to everyone else that kind of looks weird, like what are they doing? To them, they're listening to music. So instead of acting logically if you're in a library, for example, instead of acting logically like you should, like being quiet and keeping yourself controlled, these people, they don't realize it, and their emotions kind of take over. So in this way, music has a very profound effect on our emotions. And like I mentioned before with the whole example with the man and the lady and how she burned her face, music makes us really distracted. So not only do we lose our rational thinking, our intellect. Like at the moment that we listen to music, we become completely unaware of the things that are around us, and we really need to be aware of that. Now you're probably now I just wanted to quickly cover that, music also has negative effects on children. So just for if there's any young children, or parents listening, then music has a negative effect on children. And for example, when children are young, that's kind of the time in their life when they start building their character. And if you expose children to bad music, like for example, if you show them a movie with really bad music in it, or if you go somewhere where there's a lot of bad music or anything like that, then they start listening to it. It affects their emotions, and then they start to be unable to distinguish between what's right and what's wrong. And at that really young age, that's kind of where they're supposed to develop the distinction between what's right and what's wrong. And when they listen to this music, that can kind of alter their perspective, and they won't be able to distinguish that. And that's really critical at that age of children, because in the long run, that's going to affect them in life. So that's kind of, that's how we're going to kind of talk about music today. Also, I wanted to, since we're talking about music and all, the big question that remains now is that how can we avoid music? So Azra, do you want to just quickly mention?
Yes, very quickly I will mention some ways. And obviously once you're used to something, it's really hard to kind of stop. But if you unfortunately are someone who struggles with not listening to music, and you kind of do it all the time and you want to come out of the habit, there are certain ways, but you have to kind of make some sacrifices, because our nafs, we have to treat it like an animal that needs to be trained. Sometimes it leads us to sin, and we have to train it. Just like in Ramadan, when the first few days we're so hungry, we're starving, but over the course of the month we get used to it, because once we train our nafs like kind of finally complies with us. So the first step is, whatever you do, just stay away from music. With music playing, just whatever, at all costs, just stay away from it. I know it's hard, but after a while you'll become so used to it, it'll come like second nature. And then while you're not listening to the haram music, kind of ease out of it. If you constantly listen to music, you're used to hearing things. Your mind is used to hearing this constant noise. So kind of ease out of it. Maybe you can listen to qasidas or salams or something that, not salams, qasidas and nasheeds, Islamic nasheeds. There's so many of them that don't have music. But if you're used to hearing that tune, you can hear halal nasheeds, and that's fine. And then ease your way, and then after a while, you don't have to listen to those either, because you kind of slowly ease your way out. So definitely, it is hard to suddenly just listen to music and then not listen to music. So kind of transition away from it by maybe listening to some halal nasheeds and qasidas, and then after that you can completely get used to not listening to anything at all. And then the last trick kind of to stop listening to music is to be aware and to know and understand the effects of music. We mentioned the scientific effects. You can go search it up and do research on your own. I know there's some scientific studies that kind of try to prove that music is good for you, but with that being said, there are lots of scientific studies that prove alcohol may be good for you, those studies are clearly not true at all. So please be careful, because a lot of studies contradict each other, so we have to know what's right and what's wrong, and don't believe those studies that try to prove that music is correct, because they just want to agree with the mass opinion, the public opinion, but that's not true. Music is bad for you, truly, and if you search up, you can find hadith and you can find scientific research that says why music is bad. And thirdly, from an Islamic perspective, know that music and singing is part of the greater sins. So you have to know that at the end of the day, listening to music is a temporary pleasure, and you really want to give up an eternal life of happiness over some temporary pleasure. It's really your choice. So temporary pleasure versus eternal pleasure, you would be smart to choose the eternal pleasure.
Yeah, so that's a really big point that Azra made here, that music is something that's temporary. And we all know that we have to leave the world at some point. And so if you're just going to enjoy something temporarily, that's actually going to harm you a lot. Music is a gunai kabira, so it's one of the greater sins. And you're temporarily listening to something that will harm you a lot in the long run, like in your eternal life. Then why waste your time on it now? It's something that's temporary. After you listen to it, first of all, it has bad effects. Like we mentioned before, it has bad physical effects. It does not let us to rationally think. It takes over on our emotions. And because of all of these effects that are kind of shown in the world, like the physical effects that I mentioned, there are, of course, since it's haram, there are going to be long-term effects on us in the hereafter. So if we want to live a good life in the hereafter, let's just think about, we have to think about things in the long run. That's kind of what they tell us here in America, right? Think of everything in the long run. Like when you're studying for a test, it's like something that if you do it here, if you study for the test, then you're going to do well on it in the long run, even though you don't feel like studying for the test, even though you want to watch TV, even though you want to do so many other things. If you just study for that test in the long run, you're going to be great. Similarly, if we try to avoid music temporarily, it might be like, oh, I really want to listen to the music. Of course, naturally, humans are inclined to listen to music if they don't know that it's bad. So if you just choose not to listen to music now, in the long run, it'll be so much better for you. And we just have to look that, the benefits of not listening to music simply, obviously, ultimately outweigh the so-called benefits of listening to it, which is just for your pleasure, which, we shouldn't really be looking at when we're looking in terms of the long run. So that was kind of our topic today, that, we really need to have patience. We need to have control on ourselves. We need to be able to control our impulses to listen to music, even though it's something that's really attractive. There are a lot of things in the world that are attractive. For example, for someone who's diabetic, sugar is really attractive. It looks so good from a distance, and when you get, one spoonful of sugar, you just want more and more and more. Similarly, when you listen to music, you listen to a little bit of it, it naturally sounds really good, right? And then you just want more and more and more and more, and then you end up to a point where you're doing something that completely harms you in the long term. Similarly, if a diabetic person, if they're going to slowly eat more and more and more sugar, their sugar is going to get out of control, and that has really bad effects long term on their life. Similarly, if we want to take prevention and make sure we have a great afterlife, we need to try to avoid music. And hopefully, when we avoid music, we'll become more closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in the long run, it'll help us. So if you just stay away from it completely, if right now you're in a state where even if you're in a grocery store, for some reason, you can't control your impulse to listening to music, like Azra said, plug in your headphones and listen to a nasheed, and, fill something in your ears that is not haram, and that's actually good for you to listen to, like a nasheed about, our prophets, alayhimus salam. So that'll kind of ease your transition out of music. But don't make it, I'm just kind of making this a major point, don't make it an excuse just because you don't put on music yourself and you hear it somewhere else that it's okay to listen to music. Because that's also something that you hear that, I'm not putting on music myself, so why should I be blamed for it? It's the store's fault for putting it on. You know what I'm saying? So when looking at it in that way, we really need to understand that we have to stay away from music no matter where it's coming from, because in the long term it will affect us both in this world with its physical effects, its effects on our emotional self when it takes us away from our rational thinking, in addition to its negative effects on the real in the world that we're in now. It'll have negative effects, and then in the long run, when we live in our eternal life, it will definitely have negative effects. So we all need to know that, we all are going to leave the world one day. Music is a temporary thing. Just let it go now. It's going to harm you in this world and in the hereafter, so why listen to it? I mean, for solely your pleasure that's only temporary, that's not a good enough reason, right? So knowing the benefits of avoiding music versus listening, versus the benefits you think, because of your pleasure, we really need to understand these benefits of not listening to music, and hopefully we can stay away from it and become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the message for today is, I hope you all understood from the reasonings and explanations that me and Azra gave to you, that Azra and I gave to you today, and hopefully you can apply to your own lives. Next time you hear music, hopefully we can try to shift ourselves away from it and become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that was the discussion for today, and I hope you all learned something new. Thank you.